Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 136, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. It has been a marathon of a summer. I see September up ahead, and the relief is palpable. I was actually able to get some sewing in this week. I made a pair of free-range slacks. That's a Sew House 7 pattern. And I made the narrow leg version, which I haven't made before. I made the cropped leg version, and then I lengthened the cropped leg version into a full-length pant. And I decided to make the narrow leg version this time. I made them out of some Kona Crush, which unfortunately is no longer available. I love Kona, as some of you know, and when Kona Crush came out, I bought a lot of it because it's great for garments. Basically what it is a cotton fabric that's got permanent wrinkles set into it. I made some samples for the store using Kona Crush, and I bought, whenever I saw it, I bought it. So I was at the Quilting Bee in Spokane, Washington in April, and they had a little bit left on a bolt of black. It was about 4 yards, so I bought all of that, and that's what I used to make these narrow leg free range slacks. I've been wearing them all week. I finally had to put them in the laundry today. That is one of the most comfortable pant patterns I've ever used, and I'm looking at my other lengths of Kona Crush. I've got some cadet blue and kind of a dark-ish deep green, and I'm thinking I should just go ahead and make a couple more pairs of pants because I know that they will get worn. I've been prepping for my classes at Quilting Mayhem, which are coming up on September 3rd and 4th. On September 3rd, I'm teaching Fit Without Fear and pattern hacking, or as I like to call it, Franken-patterning. And then on Friday, I'm teaching a knitting tune-up class and a lace knitting class. I'm very excited about teaching these fitting classes, but they're a bit hard to prepare for because I'm going to want the students in the class to kind of direct the conversation and tell me what things they frustrate them about fitting. And I've done this before in other classes and it works really well, but I'll have a handout that's got some basic information in it, but I expect that we'll go in a couple of different directions depending on who's in the class and what they want to learn. I'm also thinking about what I want to start sewing for the fall, and I have that Lou raincoat that I want to get back to at some point. But it's also canning season. I make roaster pans full of chicken stock and can the stock and put the meat in the freezer. So I did a batch earlier this week and canned up 6.5 quarts of chicken stock. And I've got another roaster pan cooking down right now, and I'll be canning that up this afternoon. The pantry is woefully bare. We are almost out of salsa, and my husband has salsa on his eggs every morning, so he's mildly panicked that I'm not going to have enough salsa to get him through the rest of the winter. But there are tons of tomatoes out in the garden, and I peeked at them this morning, and they're just starting to get ripe. I was driving into town the other morning and saw a bear in the middle of the road, a black bear. We also have grizzlies, and I have seen the occasional grizzly, but the black bears tend to be a little more common around here. I didn't get a good picture of him because he zoomed off into the woods. I got a little bit of video off the dash cam, and that's on the blog if you want to go look at it. But it's that time of year when the bears are trying to fatten up for winter. We did not have a good huckleberry season this year. There just weren't that many berries. And the humans are just as disappointed about that as the bears. But I also need to start getting apples off of our trees because I don't want the bears trying to climb up into the trees and breaking branches. So lots to do around here, and I really do enjoy the fall a lot. The tourists have gone home and traffic is a lot lighter. The weather is better because it's not so blisteringly hot. I like seeing the pantry shelves fill up, and my sewing time increases, which is the best part. So that's what's been happening around here. For today's episode, I want to talk about JOANN Fabrics. Or rather, where do we go now that JOANN Fabrics is no more? And this is a question I hear pretty much every time 2 or 3 sewists get together. This question comes up. Where are you getting your supplies? And we've all been there. So you know the feeling of working on a project at 7 o'clock at night and you realize that you need 1-inch wide elastic and all you have is 1.5-inch wide elastic. Maybe you're close to finishing the project and you hope to wear it the following day. But without that critical supply, you can't finish your project. And I've said this before that I think a lot of us went through a process of grieving after JOANN Fabrics closed, and maybe some people will think that that's over the top or a little unnecessary, but we lost something integral and critical to our sewing processes, and I think a lot of us mourn that. And I'm not going to be ashamed of that. Wrapped up in there is a lot of anger, at least for me, at people who obviously didn't know how to run a business properly, and people who assumed that sewing was something that grandmothers do. I hear this all the time. People express surprise that there are still people sewing out there, and I say, yes, it's $1 billion business every year. I'm angry that private equity goes in and strips out the value of long-standing businesses. I'm angry about a lot of stuff. So what exactly did we lose? We lost convenience. For those of us who had a JOANN Fabrics store in our town, they were open before COVID, a lot of them from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So you knew that at 7 o'clock, if you needed that 1-inch wide elastic, you could run to JOANN Fabrics and pick it up. Immediate access is nothing to sneeze at. I know we are probably spoiled, and this whole episode probably sounds like a first world problem episode, and I'm sure in some ways it is, but being able to have access to those supplies was something that we probably took for granted. We lost the ability to touch fabric. My husband is an online shopper. He would rather click a few times on Amazon and have something delivered to the door than have to go to town and look for it. But fabric doesn't fall into that category. It's not a widget. It's not a nut or a bolt. You have to know what you're buying before you buy it. I've said before that my younger daughter is a buyer at Nordstrom, and when she first started her job, I took her to JOANN Fabrics and we walked that entire store. And I said, this is corduroy, this is gabardine, this is cotton gauze, this is voile, this is twill. And I showed her all the different kinds of fabrics that she might run into in her job. She doesn't sew, but she needs to be educated about fabric terminology because she's ordering clothes every day. We lost the ability to try things for low stakes. You want to try out fabric painting? You could go to JOANN Fabrics and for probably less than $10 or $15 come home with enough stuff to monkey around with fabric painting for a couple of days. If you decided that you didn't like it, you weren't out a whole bunch of money. If you decided that you did like it, you could work your way up that skill. If you wanted to practice sewing with different kinds of fabrics, you could visit the remnant rack. we lost what I like to call a neutral entry point. When you walk into a specialty store, whether it's quilting or beading or soap making or whatever, when you walk into that store, the assumption is that you are there for a reason and you know the terminology, you know what you're looking for. So that can be very intimidating for rank beginners. It takes a special kind of salesperson to gently shepherd a new sewist or a new quilter through the myriad of options. And let's be honest, you don't always get that in a store. We also lost an informal community, and I know that JOANN Fabrics was less and less good at this as time went by, and especially during and after COVID, it seemed like they were just putting warm bodies in there. But if you were fortunate enough to have some experienced salespeople in your store, I think of Nancy, who was at our cutting table. Nancy didn't put up with much at the cutting table, but if you had a question, she was more than happy to answer it. And Nancy works at Home Depot now, so I see her occasionally when I'm in town. I knew most of the salespeople by name, and Kalispell wasn't that big a town some years ago, and so we would see each other everywhere. So we didn't just lose a store. We lost a critical piece of the sewing infrastructure when JOANN Fabrics closed. So where do you buy fabric now? And I'll be the first to admit that JOANN's carried some lower quality fabric, yes, but I have 3 toaster sweaters made from a cabled rayon sweater knit that are now going into their 4th season of wearing and still look really nice. Their clearance rack was a great place to find fabric that I could use for making muslins. I try now to shop at independent fabric stores, and a lot of them are quilt stores, yes, but I try to shop at independent fabric stores because I want them to stay in business. And here is the well-kept secret about quilt stores, and I hope that this becomes more the norm as we go along. But a lot of quilt stores can order and will be happy to order if they think that there's enough demand garment fabric, because a lot of the quilt fabric companies also sell garment fabric. Robert Kaufman sold Kona cotton. I can't tell you how much Kona I have used over the years, but they also sold Kona Crush. They sold a fabulous knit Ponte fabric for a while, and I've got 3 or 4 lengths of that in my stash. Art Gallery Fabrics sells quilt fabric, but they also sell garment fabric. And if you know where to look, go to the 108 section, go to the wide back section of a quilt store, and you might find some Cafe Facet or Tula Pink cotton sateen, because that's the substrate that they use for their wide backs. And I will tell you that I have made 6 garments out of that cotton sateen wide back fabric because it is lovely. Even some quilt cottons can be used for garments. My friend Ariella makes button-down shirts out of quilting cotton, and she makes some really fun ones because there are lots of great prints in quilting cottons. I know that the quilt stores out there are aware that garment makers are looking for garment fabrics, and I think that the quilt stores want to be responsive to that, but a lot of them just don't know what to order. So if you're a garment sewist, go to your local quilt store and say, do you carry any garment fabric? Can you order garment fabric? Can I help you by suggesting some possibilities? And if you're really generous and really want to help your local quilt store, offer to make a store sample. Our local quilt store sold a ton of garment fabric because I made store samples, and when people can see and touch and try on something, they're more likely to buy the fabric. And it turns into a win-win for everybody. If you're lucky enough to have an actual fabric store in your town that specializes in garment fabric, do everything you can to keep them in business. The Confident Stitch down in Missoula is 2 hours away from me, but it is absolutely 100% worth the drive. The Pink Thread in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is another great store. They just had their 1-year anniversary. And of course, when I go to Seattle, I go to Pacific Fabrics without hesitation because I have gotten some of the best garment fabrics there. Upholstery and home dec stores might not seem like places to get supplies, but they may have remnants that can be used to make bags. And they might be delighted to find out that somebody's willing to purchase their remnants. Thrift stores used to be a great place to pick up fabric. Not so much anymore. And I don't know. Our thrift stores here in town have really gone down in quality. A lot of them won't even take fabric remnants or sheets or blankets. Almost nobody carries patterns anymore, although I hope that changes now that patterns are harder to get. But one of our local thrift stores used to have a huge display of vintage patterns, and they got rid of all of them. I suspect they all went into the dumpster. Sometimes you can find unfinished projects at thrift stores or secondhand stores. We had a lady in our church who loved to take unfinished projects and finish them. So she would find partially made quilts and finish the quilt. And some of the things that she did maybe weren't what I would consider worth my time, but others were just phenomenal. There are a lot of really good online fabric retailers. I don't want you to think that you have to shop in person. I have quite a few favorite fabric retailers. I just ordered from Cali Fabrics. I've ordered from knitfabric.com. I've ordered from Surge Fabric. I've ordered from Discovery Fabric. I've ordered from Seattle Fabrics. I used to like to go shop there, but they did away with in-person shopping during COVID and haven't brought it back. One online fabric retailer that I really miss, almost as much as I miss JOANN's, is fabric.com. And I think they were run by Amazon. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I'm pretty sure that they were run by Amazon. And you could go to fabric.com, and the best thing about them was their search engine. They had the best, most robust, most detailed search engine of any place I've ever seen on the internet, including not fabric stuff. And you could absolutely dial down and get exactly the fabric that you were looking for. Even if nobody ever brought back a store like that, just making that search engine available to everybody on the planet would be a huge improvement. If you're going to shop online, it is a good idea to educate yourself. You're going to need to learn about fiber content, and fabric width. So is it linen? Is it cotton? Is it rayon? Is it tencel? Most garment fabrics are between 54 and 60 inches. But what if you want to make something and the fabric that you want to use is only 44 inches? Do you know how many extra yards you'll need? Some patterns can't be cut out of 44-inch wide fabric because the pattern piece is too wide. Are you buying a knit or a woven? Do you know the different weave structures? Do you know what a plain weave is and a twill? Do you know what a rib knit or a tuck knit looks like? They're different. What is the scale of the print? You don't want to buy something that you think has a little ditzy print on it and get it only to realize that it's a huge, large-scale print that's going to be difficult to use in a garment. What is the fabric weight? This is a big one now for me. I like it when an online retailer puts the weight of the fabric in ounces or GSM, grams per square meter, because that lets me compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. I have been looking for a particular kind of fabric. This is one of the ones that I ordered from JOANN Fabrics this week. I have been looking for a heavyweight rayon jersey knit because I want to make a pair of knit culottes to wear this winter with boots. And I finally found a fabric that I think is going to meet my requirements. It was 315 GSM, which is on the heavier side. A rayon spandex knit for a top, for example, for a t-shirt might be 150 GSM. And I've said this before, a lot of us tend to shop by color. Color is the last thing that you should evaluate when you're looking at a fabric. Some online retailers will provide swatches either for free or free with purchase or for a nominal fee. And if you're not in a hurry, this is a great way to get that specific fabric that you're looking for. And I'm going to talk about the big box retailers because almost all of us have one in our towns where we live. So maybe you have a Michael's, maybe you have a Hobby Lobby, maybe you have a Walmart, maybe you have all three. I'm going to start with Hobby Lobby, and we're going to set aside any controversy about their business policies. I'm just looking at this from a supply standpoint. Whether or not you shop at Hobby Lobby is your business. But in terms of supply, I have been baffled, totally and completely baffled, as to why Hobby Lobby did not step into the breach when JOANN Fabrics closed. They had the perfect opportunity to do so. They already had the infrastructure. They were already ordering from suppliers. They had the retail space on the floor. Why not just do what JOANN's was doing? Instead, at least at our Hobby Lobby, and I think pretty much at all of them, because I go to different Hobby Lobbies when I'm traveling, they went backwards. They stopped carrying patterns. They're down. They aren't carrying New Look. They aren't carrying McCall's. They're down to simplicity. I don't think our Hobby Lobby has gotten any new garment fabric in for probably a year and a half. Michael's acquired JOANN's intellectual property, and they have put knitting and sewing sections, expanded sewing sections in some of their stores. Our Kalispell store is not one of them. The sewing supplies in our Michael's store take up half of one aisle, and it's in the back corner of the store. Even in the stores where they have put in a sewing section, most of the sewing sections that I've seen are kind of disorganized. They don't have a good cutting table area. I know they're trying, and I give them points for trying. Our Walmart did away with its remnant rack, and I'm still trying to decide if I want to complain about that or not. Our store just underwent a huge renovation and rearrangement. They moved the pharmacy to the front of the store, and they moved arts and crafts, which was in the front of the store, back to the back of the store. And when they did that, the remnant rack disappeared. The Walmart in Missoula still has a hefty remnant rack. So I'm not quite sure what the metric is for deciding whether or not a store gets a remnant rack. And when I say remnants, I mean 2, 3, and 4 yard offcuts of designer dead stock. Designer in quotes. I think it was coming from some mills in Los Angeles. The other thing that frustrates me about most of the Walmart stores that I've been in is that they have patterns, and they've got a pattern cabinet with a catalog sitting on the top, but I have never been able to find a pattern at Walmart because the patterns that are in the catalog are not the ones that are in the cabinet. And I think we've exhausted fabric. I think now is probably a good time to talk about patterns. What do you do now with no JOANN Fabrics and no $1.99 or $5.99 sale, has that affected how you sew and what you sew? Let's talk about the Big 4/Big 7, because Simplicity, McCall's, Butterick, Vogue, New Look, Know Me, and Berta are now all under simplicity.com. And you may know that the pattern companies got spun off from their parent company. Abby Glass, who used to work for Simplicity, she worked for them for something like 30 years, came out of retirement to put together a group to buy Simplicity, and she stayed on for a while, and she was very upfront that it wasn't going to be a permanent thing because she wanted to go back into retirement, which I believe she has. I have mixed feelings about simplicity.com. I have ordered PDF patterns from them, and some of the PDF patterns have problems. They aren't tiled properly, or they aren't separated properly. So I made a jacket last year. It's actually the pattern that I used for my Bernina University quilted jacket. And when I took the A0 file to the local print shop to have them printed on their large format printer, one of the pattern pieces was cut down the middle, and one part of it was on one page and another part of it was on another page, and it all could have gone on one page. So that was a layout issue. More recently, I ordered paper patterns from them. It took over a week for the order to be filled, and then it took another week and a half for them to arrive in the mail, because we all know what the postal service is like these days. A lot of people will say, well, don't order anything from the big 7 pattern companies because indie pattern companies are so much better. And I think that's a bit subjective. I have always had good luck with big 7 patterns. But yes, there are a lot of really great indie pattern companies out there, and they were the first ones to have extended sizing and offer downloadable PDFs. But being an indie pattern company doesn't automatically make you superior to the big 7 patterns. A really good indie pattern company is going to be upfront about what the criteria they are using for their fit models or for their block. Some may have abbreviated patterns. Style Arc, I think, is going back through a lot of their older catalog and redoing some of their patterns because their pattern instructions were pretty brief, almost as brief as Berta. Most indie companies are offering projector files, so if that's something that you're looking for, you should be able to find an indie pattern company that offers projector files. Some of them offer their own on-site pattern printing, so if you buy a PDF, you can opt to have them print it for you and then mail it to you. The one thing I'm not thrilled about with PDF patterns is the expense of printing can really add up. If I have to take an A0 file to the blueprint place in town to have it printed on their large format printer, even if I do it in black and white, the cost of printing may double the cost of the pattern altogether. So that's something to be aware of and a reason that you might want to consider a projector file. Personally, I have really cut down on the number of patterns that I'm purchasing. I purchased enough patterns at JOANN Fabrics $1.99 sales over the years that I've got a fairly large library of patterns. It seems like most styles get recycled over and over again, and I've gotten really good at pattern hacking and taking parts of one pattern and attaching them to another pattern. So I've got kind of a mix and match library at this point. And I will really only buy something if it's a pattern that I don't already own. Especially if it's a style that I've been wanting to tinker around with in terms of pattern hacking and pattern drafting. But for making my own clothes anymore, I've got a dozen or so tried and true patterns, and That's the backbone of my clothing. Notions are a tough one because I think a lot of us don't mind paying shipping for 5 yards of fabric, but it's much harder to pay shipping on one zipper that might double the cost of that zipper. Sometimes it's easier just to order the 10 zippers, even if you don't think you're going to use them all. I was very fortunate in that my mother-in-law had an extensive sewing stash that I inherited. My mother also has an extensive sewing stash that she has bequeathed to me. Even though she's still very much alive and kicking, she doesn't sew much anymore. A few months ago, an elderly lady in our congregation passed away, and her daughter called me last week and said, "Would you come and look at Mom's sewing stuff and see if there's anything that you want?" So I came home with 3 boxes of sewing and quilting patterns and a whole box of notions and a sewing machine, which it's an old Singer and I don't want it to go to the landfill, so I'm keeping it until I can find a good home for it. Again, the big box stores are typical places where you can find basic notions. Quilt stores might have bag making zippers, but very few of them have garment zippers. The one thing that we're having trouble sourcing now is good buttons. Interfacing is a huge issue because Hobby Lobby carries mostly non-woven interfacings. I was in there a few weeks ago and a lady was looking for some sew-in interfacing and she couldn't find it. My friend Janet, who we all call the other Janet, or sometimes I get called the other Janet, depending on the context, but she was looking for some buttons to go with a waistcoat pattern that she just finished, and she ended up alcohol dyeing some because she couldn't find the right color. So there are creative ways to get around that, but sometimes you just have to break down and order stuff online. I like wawak.com for sewing supplies, and what I try to do is keep a running list of things that I need and then just order them all at once. If you saw my sewing room and my sewing stash of lots of things, you could quite easily accuse me of being a hoarder, and you might not be wrong. I have this thing about being prepared, and I think part of it is living in a rural area. I live in rural Montana. When we first moved here, there were some weeks that I could not get to the grocery store. And I learned very quickly to have a deep pantry in terms of food storage, and I also carried that over to my sewing supplies. So I have a very deep pantry of sewing supplies. And during COVID, when I could not find black Kona cotton anywhere, I had a small supply. It's since been beefed up because I used a lot of it during COVID, but I kind of laugh about that being my barometer. If I can't find black Kona cotton, then something is wrong. But you may want to decide what it is that you use regularly enough that having a stash of it on hand is a good idea. I buy my sewing machine needles in bulk because I've got 4 Bernina machines that all use sewing machine needles, and buying them in bulk is just the most cost-effective way to have what I need on hand. You can get by with black, white, and neutral thread. I've said before that one of the most common threads that I use in my serger is kind of a light seafoam green, which seems to blend with everything, and that's counterintuitive to me, but it works. You may want to have a batch of zippers in common sizes and basic colors. I would have interfacing on hand, both knit and woven. Buy a bolt of it. If you see it on sale somewhere, just buy the bolt because you will probably use it. Most of us probably have more 1/4-inch elastic than we'll know what to do with in our lifetimes because we probably bought it to make masks during COVID. But having elastic in other lengths and sizes is also a good idea, whether you buy it on a roll or you buy it in packages. When JOANN Fabrics was going out of business, there were a few things that I stocked up on, and elastic was one of them. I always have spare rotary blades and extra bobbins on hand. Again, these are the kinds of things that if I'm in a thrift store and I see them, I will snap them up. The key is that once you get them home, make sure that everything is organized. I have little shoebox bins for all of my notions and everything is organized because if something happens to me and my kids have to come in, I want them to be able to say, "Oh, here's a box of snaps. We're going to put this out in the yard sale and we're going to price it at XYZ." Or they're going to say, "Hey, let's call all of Mom's friends and ask them if they want to come shop in her stash." And it will be better for them if everything is organized. The last thing I want to talk about is community, because we did lose some community when we lost JOANN Fabrics. Whether you went there for sewing classes or to visit with people, how much visiting happened in those cutting table lines? Were you ever at a JOANN Fabrics on Black Friday, standing in line, waiting for your turn at the cutting table? How many conversations happened? How many friends did we make, even just for 15 minutes? You can order fabric online, but community doesn't come in a box. So where do you find community now? Quilt stores, obviously, but I'm going to suggest that even if you're a garment sewist, go to a quilt store's open sew sessions. I think most of those people would be delighted to have somebody else there, even if they're not working on a quilt. See if there are groups that meet at local churches. A lot of times there are groups meeting to sew projects for Ryan's Case for Smiles. They make pillowcases for kids in the hospital. Project Linus. Sewists are generous people. I have met very few sewists who are not willing to sew for charity in some way, shape, or form. Take some classes. Take some classes at your local community college or one of your local fabric stores. You might meet one or two more people that have the same interests as you, and you can start your own little sewing group. Is there a quilt guild in your town? Join the quilt guild. I know our quilt guilds are struggling a bit because most of the members are getting older, and I realize that younger women don't always have the time or the energy when they are trying to work a full-time job and maintain a creative practice. But even a group that meets once a month can be a great place to have some community and talk face to face and get ideas. Find out if your town has a makerspace or a library program. Our library in Kalispell has been doing mending classes. We have a local makerspace that's growing by leaps and bounds. Churches and community programs are great places to find community. And again, I realize that a lot of them meet during the day, which doesn't work for those who have full-time jobs, but sometimes they can be persuaded to meet in the evenings. One of the things that I am also grieving is we don't have a quilting group at my church anymore because there are only about 3 of us left that actually quilt. We used to have a group of about a dozen women that got together on the first Thursday of every month for a potluck and a quilting session, and it's gone now. I do belong to a craft co-op that's pretty thriving. We have quite a few members, and it meets on Thursdays as well, usually from about 10 to 3. I don't need as much in-person contact as other people do. I'm an introvert, and I like sewing at home by myself, but I do love going to our Thursday group, especially for show and tell, because it's so inspiring to see what other people are working on. Online community is absolutely a thing. Absolutely, 100%. In fact, I sometimes call myself a digital extrovert because I tend to be pretty vocal and active in online groups more than I go looking for those groups in person. If you have a favorite designer or a favorite pattern company, look to see if that person or that company has an online community. But try to find a sewing mentor in person too, because when it's late at night and you need to call somebody, have a trusted friend that you can call that can walk you through setting in a sleeve. I tell my friends, please, 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 please do not order off of Etsy or another online store until you ask me if I have a 20-inch zipper in hot pink, because I probably do, and I would be happy to give it to you. If you are a quilt store owner or someone who works in a quilt store, I want to encourage you to welcome people who don't yet speak quilt shop. You may get some rank newbies walking through your door who have never seen a rotary cutter or don't know what a wide back is and have no idea how to interpret or read a needle sizing system for their machine. Be gentle with them. Do not be condescending. This is a potential future customer. And in terms of inventory, you don't need to become JOANN Fabrics. Focus on one or two areas. Maybe you carry a good selection of interfacing. Maybe you carry a wide variety of garment fabric. Maybe you've got the notions that people are looking for, or maybe you're willing to carry the patterns. Are you a store that sells machines, including sergers? Become a knit fabric expert. Lots of quilters want to make bags, so you could carry bag hardware. Or you could carry muslin and tracing supplies. Find out what's not available at other stores in your area and carry those items. You can offer inexpensive entry points to get people in the door and sewing. So maybe you do a 1-hour fabric class on the different types of fabric. Maybe you do a pattern reading workshop. A notions petting zoo. Doesn't that sound interesting? Have a variety of notions set out and let people try them. Let them try seam rippers to see how they work. Do a needle and thread clinic. Offer a guided store tour. Do a monthly problem-solving drop-in hour. And do short demonstrations followed by shopping opportunities with discounts. One of the things that our quilt store did was have a session where we made scrunchies, and people could use little bits of leftover fabric and elastic bands and come out with a scrunchie. So here's what I want you to take away from this episode. We don't have a single business that's going to replace JOANN's. There's never going to be another JOANN Fabrics. So what we all need now is kind of a network that's made up of stores and specialty shops and sewing organizations or community groups and other makers. And it's that kind of web rather than a single store that's going to keep us afloat. Because it isn't just a question of who will sell us fabric. Now it's a question of who will teach us, who will help us solve problems, who will introduce us to new possibilities, and who will give us a place to belong. I see lots of opportunities for new things to sprout up and develop. I think now that it's been almost a year and a half without JOANN Fabrics, and I think the dust is starting to settle. But I think it's not necessarily worse, it's just different. If you want to send feedback about this episode or anything about the podcast in general, you can do that one of several different ways. You can email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can leave a comment on the show notes page. You can use the fan mail feature. I also love it when I see new reviews and ratings on Apple Podcast and Spotify. So if you're so inclined, go there. That does help other people find us. The show notes page is at the podcast website, which is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is www.janetzabo.com, and that has links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website and to my blog. As I mentioned, there may not be an episode next week because I'll be traveling, but I will talk to you when I get back. I'm sure I will have lots of things to tell you. So until next time, I hope you have a great week and you get to go sew something.